Wait. Now it's recording.
Okay, great. Well, hello again, everyone, and welcome to the first webinar of the ReBIOlution series. So today we will explore the benefits and challenges of using first and second generation of feedstock for bio-based material production. Additionally, of course, we will discuss the latest advancements in bio-based chemical building blocks with a particular focus on diacids and diols. So we are pleased today to have two estimated experts. The first one will be Michael Corres from Nova Institute, who will discuss the pros and cons of the first and second generation of feedstocks. And then we have Ed De Jong from Avantium, who will present the state of the art in the bio-based chemical building blocks. So we are also joined by Kai Oliver, the coordinator of ReBIOlution projects, who will guide us and give a brief explanation of the project. So each presentation will be followed by a Q&A session where you will have the opportunity to share your thoughts and ask a question through the chat, or you can raise your hand and we can give you the floor to ask any question that you have. So let's begin. So right now I'll give you the floor to Kai Oliver, our coordinator, to give you a brief presentation of the project.
Yes, good morning, everyone. I just wanted to use the few minutes that I've got as the intro to let you know about our project. My name is Kai Siegenthaler. I'm a research chemist at BASF in Germany, and I am coordinating the project that Estibaliz has mentioned. The project is named ReBIOlution. And the target of the project ReBIOlution is to develop 100% bio-based, biodegradable materials for specific applications. We are talking there about polyester blends, so materials which you are probably aware of, that are used in applications in which biodegradability adds a value, like, for example, in food paper packaging, or also in agricultural applications. And these are exactly the target areas in which we are, for which we are developing these materials. I mean, everything is contained already in the title, and makes me the introduction of the webinar series easy, because the important aspects of such kind of materials are the bio-basedness, so the renewable raw materials. Then in our case, it's the biodegradability. And when you talk about biodegradability and biodegradable materials and the value that these materials add, a third topic is microplastics, so persistent and non-persistent microplastics. And these are exactly the three focus areas of the webinar series which we offer. And yeah, so I'm happy to hand over to Michael Corres from the Nova Institute to start this webinar about bio-based raw materials today. I'm happy that you're here, so enjoy.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction. I will try to share my screen. Yeah, I hope you can see the screen well.
Yes, yeah, we can see the screen.
Good. So the title is, well, the presentation is mainly about the discussion on food and feed crops, but I have also some background information, like what Kai was just mentioning, about what biomass is used today for the chemical sector. And first have a short introduction on Nova and RCI. Nova Institute is a private independent institute for research and consultancy. We was founded in 1994, and we have now today nearly 50 scientists. And our message is, our mission is, to support the smart transition to renewable carbon. That means from fossil carbon to biomass, CO2, and recycling, or we call it also today to defossilization. And for this purpose, we have 4 departments, and you see today mainly from two departments the slides. Technology, scouting, and market research is one department. Another is sustainability, mainly life cycle assessment, communication, and economy and policy. And most of the data today coming from technology and markets and economy and policy department. Yeah, you will find the publications I show you today. You can find them under renewable-carbon.eu under publications. There, I think you can find something like 500 reports, and also the latest one I will show today also visible there. If you're looking for some graphics, there's also an extra part for graphics. If you look into news, there's a news system, renewable carbon news, with I think 40,000 news. Meanwhile, companies is a directory of company offering products, intermediates, and newsletter. You can also make an abonnement of the daily or monthly newsletter. And last but not least, on events on the top, there you find the coming events. Yeah, 500 publications. I said it already, and we made some on food crops, on biomass availability, and I will show it in a minute. The work I show today is financed by Renewable Carbon Initiative. So the work was done by Nova Institute experts, but the budget came from RCI, and in one case also from BIC. RCI is an interest group, and meanwhile with 80 members. Also Avantium is also a member. You see here brands on board. Brands are door opener in Brussels, startups, research institutes, partners, and a wide range of suppliers and SMEs. And I will not go in more details here because of time limitation, but if you need more information, please reach out to me. Yeah, food crops. Food crops for industry are a major cause of food insecurity and hunger. So many brands fear public attack for using food crops and stay away from them. But is this really true? This discussion we have since 10 or 20 years, and many companies also repeating we would never use food crops. Yeah, is there a reason for that, or is it just a populistic approach, not backed up by science? This statement suggests that there is a fixed amount of wheat, for example, and that industry is therefore taking quantities of the food market and is responsible for hunger. We will see that this assumption is wrong. Hunger experts estimate that the impact is rather marginal. Moreover, when demand increases, more wheat is grown, which actually increases food security in critical years. There's a first quick answer to this question. Of course, we will have much more details in the next 20 minutes. Yeah, we have this publication here, made in 23. This is the main basic for my presentation today. And you can also download it for free of charge from renewable-carbon.eu. It's the in-depth assessment of the claim that the use of food and feed crops for any other applications, fuels and biomass materials, is bad for food security. A plea for evidence-based debates and to treat this complex topic with more differentiation. Yeah, this report has 36 pages and meanwhile more than 1,500 downloads, so it's used a lot from industry and policy with included slides. Yeah, reason for hunger. That's an important issue. What is the reason for that? Climate change, next to COVID and conflicts, is the most important reason for hunger worldwide. Climate change. And there's also a statement of the World Food Programme. If average global temperature rises by 2 degrees Celsius from pre-industrial levels, an additional 189 million people are expected to be pushed into hunger. In a 4 degrees Celsius warmer world, the figure could rise to a staggering of 1.8 billion. All solutions that mitigate climate change are important in the fight for more food security. The same goes with biodiversity. Climate change is expected to be the main driver of biodiversity loss in the coming decades. Yeah, so climate change is the main reason, and we hope with our bio-based products, of course, lower the climate change, the greenhouse gas emissions, because this is in line with what we need to tackle the hunger worldwide. Why bio-based chemicals and materials? To mitigate climate change, we need to end our dependence on fossil resources. 70% of all greenhouse gas emissions originate from fossil carbon. So to extract more fossil carbon from the ground is the main reason for climate change. In the energy sector, that means decarbonization, switching to wind and solar energy. In the material sector, this is not possible because organic chemistry will always need carbon as a part of its molecule. So here, decarbonization is not the right term. We should more talk about defossilization. If chemicals and materials are not collected and recycled at the end of life, the embedded carbon is set free in form of greenhouse gas emissions. This is about 2/3 of the product-related carbon footprint is the carbon embedded in the products and finally entering the atmosphere. In the chemical and material sector, a shift towards renewable carbon is the equivalent to decarbonization. It can be called defossilization. That means we continue using carbon, but not fossil carbon. And this picture is also very interesting to see. It's very clear that the reason for climate change is fossil carbon. We have a second reason, land use change, turning tropical forest and agricultural land, for example. But luckily, we see that the impact of land use change is decreasing from the 60s to today. But fossil carbon extraction is still rising. We had the highest amount of crude oil, natural gas, and coal in 24 extracted from the ground, and the next record is expected in 25. So that means here really is a huge problem. We have to find a solution in the next years and decades. And here again, this concept of embedded carbon, or here it's called invisible carbon. If you look into some important building blocks of the chemical industry, we could add another 10. In principle, it's the same logic behind that we have 2/3 of the carbon is embedded in the product and 1/3 is from process energy. And here we can, so the white part we can bring to zero, but the blue part will always be carbon. The question is only which kind of carbon. And the renewable carbon concept is that we should switch to CO2 biomass and recycling carbon from above the ground. And we should not use carbon from below the ground, crude oil, natural gas, and coal. And the definition here is renewable carbon entails all carbon sources that avoid or substitute the use of any additional fossil carbon from the geosphere. Yeah, how's the situation today? And then I come quickly back to the food crops issue. But let's look how the chemical sector is covered with embedded carbon. We see 88% is from fossil carbon, oil, gas, and coal. Today, we have about 8% from bio and 4% from recycling and 0.04% from CO2 utilization. This is the world today. And so the target is till 2050 to shrink the fossil part to almost zero. This is shown in this picture here. You see here at least two interesting things in the picture. The first is that the demand for embedded carbon will increase. It will double from today to 2050. Not mainly for the European demand, but mainly to the demand in Asia, Africa, Australia, and South America. Here we have still very high growth rates. In the past, the growth rate was higher, 3.5. It's already a little bit lower, but we have to cover double carbon demand from today in 2050. Then the scenario from RCI and NOVA is that 55% could be covered by recycling, 20% by biomass, and 25% by CO2. And the next slide is now showing what does a 20% bio-based mean. But also important to see it's not possible to cover 100% with biomass. It's also not necessary, but there is not enough biomass there. We will see what is the maximum amount of biomass we can use on our planet, what kind of biomass it is. So it will be a mixture, and there are a lot of reports published the last 5 years, and they all have one in common. We need all the 3 non-fossil carbon sources, bio, CO2, and recycling, to cover the demand of the chemical industry. One alone is not possible. So this is this report. I first take a look too, because it's showing what we're using today and how much biomass we can use. We have competition, we have growing population on the planet, we need more calories per person to fight hunger. And so Nova, Eurocare, and Thünen, this was the model loss, carried out the question, will there be enough biomass in 2050 to meet this 20% share of renewable carbon we saw on the last slide? Before supplying in the chemical industry biomass, of course, food and feed demand has to be met, and also the existing European and global framework for fuels is also to be covered. And the report was published in February 25, and I show you some of the main results of the report. This was the first milestone already, but if there is any question in between, I can also, I'm happy because there are so many different topics of presentation. If someone has a question so far, it would be fine. Okay, I can't see any question. Okay. This was the first milestone in the project to see which feedstock is today or between 2023 used from the chemical industry worldwide and the European Union. And you see here pretty clear that far most of the feedstock used is starch, sugar, and vegetable oils. The primary agrobiomass, which can mostly also used for food and feed. This is completely dominating the feedstock input in the chemical industry worldwide and in Europe. The other feedstocks here you see animal fats, chemical pulp, natural rubber, glycerol, used cooking oil, primary fatty acid distillate are important but small compared to the starch, sugar, and oil. And we have also a background paper showing how we came to this data. If you are interested, it will be shared on our platform, but you can also reach out to me. Before I go in more details, I'll look to 2050. Also, another comment, what we also calculated. Food and feed crops for materials is as old as humankind, so the use of it. We have, for example, 12.4 million tons starch are used in paper, much more than in bio-based plastic. So we have in a lot of different applications, we have starch or sugar or plant oil. And here we calculated the amount turnover generated by food and feed crops in Europe. And we did this because there was some discussions from the German Ministry of Environment to stop the use of food and feed crops in industry. And I sent her this data because I think that people are often not aware about what volume we are talking here. For bio-based chemicals, the share of food and feed crops range between 50 and 60%. 11.4 million tons first generation biomass for chemicals and a turnover of 21.2 billion turnover are generated. For pharmaceuticals, the share of food and feed crops is around 90%, 24.7 million tons, generating 146 billion euro turnover. So in summary, about nearly 170 billion euro turnover food and feed crops for chemicals and pharmaceuticals in the European Union. This shows again how important food and feed crops are today in the industry. When we're looking in the future, and we have done, it's not the time today to show details of the modeling. This is an only 1 hour presentation at least. But this is one of the results of the modeling in a scenario where the share of wood, straw, and bio-waste is already 20%. So this was a high wood, straw, and bio-waste biorefinery scenario. And here, the left-hand side, let's see again the situation today in Europe. 8.3 million are primary agrobiomass. Then we have the byproducts, and we have a little bit wood. The data, I'm not completely in line with this data because they come from complete different databases. So it's a little bit different here, but yeah, that can't avoid this in modeling. And for the future, we see that the total amount will times 4. So when we want to reach this 20% from the demand chemical industry in 2050, we need 4 times more biomass in Europe. And this biomass is still mainly depending on primary agro biomass, as you see here. So about nearly 50% is still on first generation. The reason is that you can so easily scale up starch and sugar production, especially starch production is easily scalable. There is enough land, is highly productive. So this is the most reasonable way to go. But you see also that, of course, the byproducts getting more, the wood sector getting more, the waste sector is becoming important. So, of course, we have a certain switch to second and third generation feedstock. But also in the future, we can't do it without food crops. If food crops will be banned for the chemical industry, we can not reach the 20% share. In this picture here, I go one time back. So this picture here, without food crops, we can perhaps reach 10%, but never the 20%. So when we really want to have a relevant replacing fossil, we need food crops. And only to give you a quick picture here, this is showing the different scenario we was calculating for Europe. You see on the left column the supply situation, domestic supply. The right-hand side, you see the demand situation. And this 20% for chemical industry in Europe can be covered with a moderate high-tech scenario, high-tech plus 5% more yield compared to business as usual. Is mainly precision farming, drones, artificial intelligence, taking care about the soil health. Then you see this hard here, HT plus 5 is able to fulfill this 20%. But you also see that Europe has still imports from other regions, not higher than today, but on the same level. And this is not surprising because Europe has a high population density and relatively small agriculture areas compared to other regions. And we also be importing biomass and selling high products made for the biomass to the world. So that also means when we want to export bio products, of course, we also have to need a certain import of biomass. But here, the final picture on this, again, in the high-tech plus 5 scenario, you see on the right-hand side the demand. Here, the demand for the chemical industry is already higher than biofuels. The reason is that biofuels are substituted by electric cars, by electric engines, and by second generation sustainable aviation fuels and marine fuels, which are not allowed to make from food crops. So they are only from secondary sources. But here you see primary agriculture biomass. So then the biofuel is a very small part in the future. And you see on the left-hand side the different supply. And in this scenario here, you would need relatively small amounts from oil, sugar, and starch to fulfill this amount for the chemical industry. So the last slide from this report, and then I switch to the benefits of the food crops. So the result was from this report, yes, 20% are possible, 20% if with a moderate high-tech scenario. But if you want to go to higher numbers, 30, 40 is already not easy to do. And more than 30, 40 is almost impossible. Okay, and when we also look to the production of food crops, that because we have in this model increasing production of food crops or cereals. And here I put one picture in the presentation that you see that in reality, indeed, the production of cereals and here wheat is increasing year by year. There are some backdrops, but in the full line, it's always increasing. So it's very realistic that we also estimate additional growth in the production. Yeah, because of time, I will skip this one here. This is a slide to saying how we can get additional biomass. There are many ways to do it. The most important is introduce a moderate high-tech scenario with precision farming. Yeah, now I come to the food crops issue, especially. When we look into food crops, there are a lot of benefits using food crops. All what you see here are benefits. And I try to make it quick here. The climate wins. There's a need to shift away from fossil feedstock to achieve climate change mitigation. And so bio-based materials are a win for climate. Then productivity wins. You see that the food and feed crops are the most efficient ones. They offer high yields. So if you want to get sugar and starch for fermentation from other crops, you need much more land, and they have also interesting co-products. Environments wins due to resource efficiency and productivity. We need reduced land area, which is very important for ecosystems and biodiversity. The farmer win because they have more options selling the stock to different markets. So the farmer loves to have markets in food, feed, biofuels, and material industry. If you grow in contrast very specific crops only for one purpose, this is not very welcome for farmers because it's a high risk for the farmer. And here a picture to the yields. Here we have a yield of fermentable sugar in tons per hectare and year. And you see sugar beet and sugar cane. The green part is only the part directly from sugar and sugar. The other part on the top are if you're using the leaves and bagasse for additional sugar production. So then in the middle you see wheat and corn or maize. They have lower yields than the sugar cane and sugar beet, but they have other advantages. And then you see the right-hand side, forest in Finland, forest in Germany, poplar, short rotation copies. So they have far less yields. So that means if you're switching from the food crops to other crops, you need more area. And this, of course, is for biodiversity, for example, not a very good idea. Also in food competition, because it's finally a competition on land. We have also compared here in one example, PLA from sugar crops with cotton in water use, in land use, in global warming, and in non-renewable energy use. And you see it's really great if you compare just for textile fibers, PLA fiber from sugar crops with cotton, a non-food crop, you see the PLA pathway is just in favor. And the same would be also for PEF, for example. And market stability wins. So if you have increased global availability of food and feed crops, reducing the risk of shortages and speculation peaks. That's also a very important point. And the influence of biofuels on the food prices is extremely small. Feed security wins due to the high value of protein-rich co-products of food and feed crops, which can also be used to supply protein for human nutrition. That's a very important point. Most of the new crops or non-food crops cannot supply any protein, and protein is a shortage and not sugars. Food security wins due to the increased overall availability of edible crops that can be stored and flexibly distributed in times of crisis, emergency reserve, actually mitigating risk of supply cycle triggered regional hunger events. Then there was a big project from WWF US. And the final quotation here is the bigger picture is not the specific issue of whether food or non-food crops are being used to produce biomaterials, but rather integration of any feedstock of biomaterial production into landscape and social, environmental, and pricing effects here. There is no one size fits all. And a few slides which do so. When I'm using corn, for example, you have on the one hand the starch part, which is used for PLA or PEF or whatever in fermentation. Then you have the protein and fiber part for feed and food. You have the corn oil using for food, and the straw part using for animal bedding or insulation material or bioenergy. So it's not a black and white picture. You always, if you touch a crop, you always have different applications for different sectors. So it's a win-win situation. And the same is here for rapeseed. Here we have also a very high protein part for food and feed. If we reduce the rapeseed production, for example, in Europe, directly the import of soya getting higher. So we have oil, protein, starch and sugar, cellulose, other materials, and then a big part also for straw. So here again, it's not a black and white picture. I think I have said already a little bit. You can get the presentation later. It's just additional comparison. What is the share of carbohydrates, oils, or proteins, or fibers in the different composition of the different crops? Here we look into the co-products. So if you produce fermentable sugars, what co-products you get? And here you see animal feed with protein is only coming from sugar beet, a little bit from sugar cane, and from wheat and maize. They deliver animal feed, and you see this line showing the protein content. If you go to waste or to wheat straw or to wood, then you have mainly lignin for energetic use. So we cannot bring proteins to human nutrition or animal nutrition. And this emerging reserve aspect is one of the most important in the case that humankind really faces a food crisis. Food and feed crops targeted to industrial markets can also serve as an emerging reserve for food and feed supply. So we have in total more cereals, for example, or more sugars, and we can use them in a real crisis to feed people. Industry were to build up additional wheat supplies for their own users. This would have multiple benefits. First of all, overall availability amount of wheat increases. Secondly, a virtual storage for time of crisis, and there were often discussion to build up wheat storages, which would be very expensive. And if you do it this way, you need perhaps every 10 or 20 years to take away from industry for a real world crisis. But in all other times, you can just use this for industrial use. The necessity of increasing storage capacities in food value chain has been stressed by more and more experts recently. I think this is my final slide. We try to put the result of our studies in this picture here. On the left-hand side, we have criteria, greenhouse gas footprint, level of subsidy needed for greenhouse gas abatement cost, land use, food security, protein-rich byproducts, and so on and so on. And if you look to this picture, you see there is not one crop, first or second generation, making this best. It's really depending on the criteria, the very mixed picture. And you see sugar and starch perform in many criteria very well. Only in a few there are red. And the virgin wood, waste wood, residues, and organic waste, they have their plus, but they also have their negative sides. So as WWF was stating in their report, it's depending on the region, on the process, on the application to say what is, in which case, the best feedstock. But sugar and starch are often part of it. And so it will not really extremely counterproductive for the bioeconomy if we are not allowed to use food and feed crops in the future. And I showed in my presentation that using them has really a lot of benefits for the agricultural system and for human nutrition. And here again, this final picture, it's not mainly the question food or non-food. It's about land integration in landscape, social and pricing effects here. Yeah, many thanks. It's the last point for our coming conferences. And I'm happy to have a few questions to my presentation.
Thank you, Michael, for this very interesting presentation and very clear. Now the floor is open for questions, so feel free to drop them in the chat Q&A section or raise your hand. I already see one question from Yannick Matt. I will read it now for you, Michael. So, do you know how much biomass would be available when Europe reduces the amount of meat consumed and more wheat, maize is available?
Yeah, in our modeling, we was a little bit surprised that the impact of lower meat consumption was not so strong as introducing high tech in agriculture. So eating less meat is in the same order as a high tech +5 scenario. We have not calculated zero meat, We have calculated that in Europe or US, the meat consumption, I think, will be half or less than half. But in other countries where it is very low, that it comes to a little sort of average, but much lower than today. And also, what is interesting, if you reduce meat production, that you have directly a gap in plant oil. So this is really interesting because most of the crops are produced for the oil crops are produced for protein, and if the protein demand goes down, the protein for feed, if the protein goes down, the production of those crops also decreased strongly, and then we have directly a crisis in plant oil supply, and then what would then happen will that we need additional areas for plant oil, and we need higher prices for plant oil, that the farmer make also profit only growing oil crops for oil without the product protein for the feed market. So it's a little bit complex, but the impact was not as big as we expected. And there are other ways like high-tech agriculture can tackle the same amount finally in additional biomass.
Okay, thank you very much for your response. I think if there are no more questions, we will quickly move on to the next presentation from Ed de Jong from Avantum. So I will leave the floor to you.
One
Thank you.
short comment. I can send you my presentation so that you can share it with the audience. Okay?
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Can you confirm that you can see my first slide?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. Thank you, Michael, for your insightful presentation. I hope I can make it within the hour, but it will be a challenge, but I will do my best. Good. So my name is Ed de Jong. I'm working with Avantium, and I will tell you a little bit about the status of bio-based diols and diacids. First of all, let me show you a bit about the ReBIOlution project. What Kai was already telling. I mean, this is a project with 9 partners. I mean, you see the logos at the right-hand side, and we are going all the way from making some of the building blocks, making the polymers, and then validate the polymers in certain applications and look at their end of life. And what was already announced, we will have some 2 more webinars coming up where we look at other aspects of the whole value chain. But today we were looking at the bio-based building blocks. I don't see my next slide.
No,
Okay.
it's not moving. Okay, right now,
Can you
yes.
see it now?
Yes.
Yeah, good. So I was also part of the IEA Bioenergy task force on biorefineries, and we did a couple of reports we produced on the status of bio-based chemicals over the years, and the most recent one is from 2020. I will use some of the information from that, and I also use some of the recent information that was presented at the Renewable Material Conference last year on the current status. So why would we supply the industry or the market with bio-based chemicals? I mean, I think what is already clear also from Michael's presentation is that if we really want to go to a circular bioeconomy, we not only need to decarbonize the energy sector, but also we have to defossilize the materials and chemical sector. And one of the major reasons why it might be interested is that we can potentially improve the economics of the bioenergy production. We can make use of industrial infrastructure. Sometimes the scaling up is easier. because energy needs always to be done at a much bigger scale than chemicals. What we will discuss a little bit more is that with some of the bio-based chemicals, we introduce unique functionality, which certainly creates a different kind of competition effect compared to the so-called drop-in. Depending on the use, I mean, we have medium-term CO2 storage, and of course, we can also reduce the non-renewable energy usage. If we look at the market size in 2020, then the fossil-based chemicals were over 330 million tons. The same molecules as what was shown by Michael are the main building blocks. What you can see already is that they are mainly deoxygenated compared to biomass or CO2-based. We always contain as a starting material oxygen. And at that moment in time, already 90 million tons bio-based chemicals and derived materials were made. However, a major part of that was really created by the ethanol and to a lesser extent to fatty acids. So certainly the bio-based chemicals market hasn't been very diversified yet. If you look at the current production of bioplastics, I mean, you see that currently the vast majority is actually generated by PLA, polylactic acid. And within the ReBIOlution project, we are really looking for a completely bio-based replacement of so-called PBAT. So a bit
sorry to interrupt, but the slides are not moving. Okay, they're in move to the global production capacities of bioplastics 2024.
Can you see it now better?
Yeah, is that the slide that you are right now talking about?
The global production capacities of bioplastics, yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right now it's moving.
Okay, correct me if I'm not moving.
Okay.
I will introduce it. So basically, what you see is that in the ReBIOlution, we are looking at replacement of PBAT by completely bio-based materials, and so that is currently around the third most important bioplastic used. So on this slide, you see a flow chart of different feedstocks to different building blocks to different end products. And you can see in principle we can use many different kind of value chains with different platforms. However, if you look at the reality on this slide, we see that the major feedstocks used currently are what so-called the C6 sugar platform. So that is based on starch or sugar, and the plant-based oil platform. And currently, almost all the commercial products are feed by one of those two platforms. And what we also see is that, for example, the lignocellulosic platform or the lignin platform, I mean, they have potential, but from an cost point of view, it is very difficult to become competitive with those C6 sugar platforms and the plant oil platforms. A couple of words about drop-in versus unique functionality of building blocks. What do we mean with that? A drop-in, for example, here we are talking about monoethylene glycol, but that's a molecule what is chemically identical to a fossil-based source, but only 100% made of bio-based feedstock. While a new functionality, and now it's example FDCA, but I mean, for example, another example is, for example, isosorbide, that is a molecule what is not, or what is not easily made from a fossil-based feedstock, and currently doesn't have really an important position in the materials sector. Now, we have, for a couple of different kind of properties, we have seen what are the advantages and the disadvantages of drop-ins versus new functionality. Now you can see quite quickly that time to market is much quicker for drop-ins. Property-wise, I mean, there are only marginally different for drop-in, while it can have improved properties when you introduce a new functionality. So that's can be or should be a unique selling point of a new functionality building block. CapEx, in both cases, I mean, it asks for CapEx expenditures compared to the traditional fossil-based routes. So, but the effect is very comparable. New functionality can create an own market space, while that is not the case with a drop-in. Also, after you have established a position, the competition with fluctuating fossil prices becomes less for new functionality compared to a drop-in. And I think we have seen that in the last years, that certainly fossil competition really has slowed down the transition. But if you look at from a regulatory standpoint, like REACH or ESA, I mean, new functionality certainly has much more hurdles to take. Around legislation, we don't see a lot of different. Also in the value chain, you see that the drop-in is much easier than a new functionality. I mean, all the way around the value chain, you have to prove that the new material you're producing is working efficiently. And in the circularity, also drop-ins have a benefit, because if you have a new functionality here, for example, as a function, we are also producing PEF. I mean, you also have to prove all the steps in the circularity. So, to summarize, I mean, the picture is diverse, but certainly, I mean, at relatively low oil prices, and also in a world where policy is very fluctuating, drop-ins are quite vulnerable at the moment. So in this report of the IEA Bioenergy, we make an extensive list of all the different molecules which can be made from biomass. It is certainly not a complete list, but it gives a good overview. Already in 2020, we knew that it was quite dynamic, and we have some extra slides here to show that actually it's a very dynamic field. In this presentation, I will focus on the diols and diacids because of the need for PBAT replacement asked for diols and diacids. This is 2 slides that I borrowed from Doris de Guzman's presentation last year at the Renewable Materials Conference. What you see is here new capacities 2023 and beyond all over the world, divided in 4 areas. What we can see is that actually there is not too much happening in at least that's my conclusion in the diols and diacid area. I mean, we see that only some in China some activity on succinic acid. Furanics, of course, is a much broader group than FTCA. I mean, it also looks to HMF, etc. But I highlighted it here, and we see some activities also on the MAG and MPG part, as well as the butane diol. The next slide is really gives an overview of the dynamics of started activities as well as stopped activities in the bio-based chemicals area. So you see it is really a lot of ups and downs in this area, and I think also Michael already showed that in his presentation. I mean, if you see the value of the products compared to the value of the feedstocks in chemicals, that ratio is completely different compared to in pharmaceuticals. So it's always a very the margins are small, and so if the outside situation is difficult, then quite quickly companies have problems. Now, I mean, what kind of diols and diacids are currently produced? And I mean, you see 2 different columns. I mean, diols with growth potential as well as diols in the pipeline. Now you see for activities like PBAT. I mean, you look especially like to molecules like ethylene and propylene and butane diol, and you see that there are quite a few companies there active. At the same time, if you look at the diacids, then the succinic production is challenging. Avantium has really recently started the FTCA production, and the azelaic and sebacic acid are already established one. If you want to start activities in it, I mean, then you really have to assess all the points here summarized. Also because of time, I will not really go into much detail here, and continue to the next slide. So I am some insight for the different chemicals. I summarized the major production routes now for a couple of diols and diacids. Monoethylene glycol. Currently, the bio-based one is really based on ethanol, but the Avantium Ray process, but also the UPM plant in Leuna uses a different process, hydrogenolysis, but certainly can improve the carbon yield of from sugars for ethylene glycol. So this is now also reaching commercial production. Propane diol is mainly produced from glucose by fermentation route, but it can also be formed from crude glycerol, and that is depending basically on the cost price of the raw material. Butane diol there are some recent overviews what the current status is, but it is also mainly used based on glucose. Succinic acid, also glucose based, while FDCA is based on fructose, and then by dehydration and subsequent oxidation to purified FDCA. Now, this is one of the latest, I think, expansions of production capacity. Was the opening of our flagship plant to produce FDCA, and we are now in the commissioning phase. I think just to give an insight, I mean, also for us, it took us almost 20 years from the first experiments in the lab to come to a commercial plant like this. And I think certainly in Europe, raising the capital to build this kind of plants is still a big challenge. Azelaic acid as well as sebacic acid are really fatty acid based routes. And I mean, this is an example how you can come to azelaic acid. So that's C9 diacid, and sebacic acid is a C10 acid, what is based on reconolic acid. So the Ricinus communis plant is producing that. So to summarize it, and I think that's also completely in line with what Michael was already saying, that first generation glucose and triglycerides are still the dominant feedstock sources for the bio-based chemicals we are discussing today. Several of the diols and diacids are commercially available. As I said, I mean, drop-in molecules are quite vulnerable for oil price fluctuations. Certainly, the current political climate is making it quite challenging to make big investments. Yeah, I think I changed it, but I should say opportunities, of course. Sorry. In Europe, both opportunities as well as threats are there for bio-based chemicals. So this was the last slide of my presentation. I'm more than willing to ask any questions, and if you are not able to do it online now, I mean, please give me an email message. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. So as suggested, we have just a couple of minutes. We're right on time if you want to ask any questions. Otherwise, feel free to maybe contact our speakers directly. I don't see any questions right now in the chat or in the Q&A box or raised hands.
Nope.
So
no. I don't see.
I'll give it a minute, but I think we can come to the end of our presentation. So, oh, is there a question? No.
No.
No,
Right now we are
excellent.
the closing remarks with we are going to give you the floor to Kai again to close the webinar. So Kai, the floor is yours.
Yes, thanks very much. I would like to thank the two speakers, Michael and Ed, very much for their insightful contributions. And I have to say, I take with me several key messages, for example, from Michael, that basically it's climate change, which we are all fighting. And yeah, I know now more what the role of bio-based raw materials can be and where the limitations are, also about first generation feedstock importance. So thanks for that. And then second, from Ed's talk, the interesting overview about details, how bio-based raw materials feed into chemical building blocks that are then used in value-added products. And there specifically how Avantium is putting it into action with their own investments into the MEG and FDCA. So I'm very satisfied with today's presentations. Thanks again. And yeah, I'm looking forward to the next webinar. Maybe Estibaliz, you can help me. When exactly is this? Is the date?
Yeah, it's in April 1st, the next webinar.
No joke, April 1st. Very good.
Exactly.
Okay,
You can find the info on the social media networks in any case.
Yes. Thanks very much and have a good day.
Thank you, everyone. Have a nice day.
Thank
Okay,
you. Have a
bye-bye.
nice day. See you at the
Thank
next
you.
session. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.